So, I decided not to join the Goodreads challenge this year in order to have a little bit of a low pressure reading year. And I had plans to take off books from my TBR if it would get too much. But instead, somewhere early in the beginning of the year, I don't remember exactly, I added even more books to my TBR because, like, by the time I set to read each book, I was going to be done in a quicker time than I wanted. And then, for a time, I've read a book in 6 days, basically a book a week, to kind of add a little pressure. But I didn't like reading books slowly and not being motivated to finish a book to go to the next book. So I created what I will call a quick list that has even more books that I want to read that I may not read, which we'll talk about. I think no matter what happens, this will probably be the most books I have read in a year. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the books that I added. First, we're going to talk about the books I added to my TBR at some point during the year, and then we're going to talk about the books that are on the quick list. So yeah, I think that is all. Let's get into it. So let's start with the books that I added to my TBR, which means I will for sure probably read all of these. And we're not going to go completely in the order that I have them on my TBR because I wanted to start with, I have two classics on this TBR, so we'll talk about them together. So first up, we have Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Now, this one, I've already read like the first half of it, or like the first part of Little Women last year, and I originally set to read it as a part of like swapping through time for reading, but then when that later evolved, and I was going to read the whole thing for its swapping screen time for reading and just include less books for that week. But then when I moved to one book a day, I decided to only read the first half because I'm pretty sure that with the first half and second half combined, I'm pretty sure it's like 700 pages or something like that. So yeah, so I did. So I only read the first half, but I think didn't know when I'd come back to it. But I guess the time to come back to it is now. Well, it's still somewhat fresh in my mind. Yeah, just with some of the things associated with this story, I'm not sure how well I'm gonna do with it, but we shall see. And then the other classic I have on my that I added to my TBR is "Oh Pioneers" by Willa Cather. Now, I don't know about you, but I had never heard of this author, and how I first heard about it was my fellow bookish creator Margaret. She had posted a short talking about a haul of like classic books that she got, and there was quite a few by this author Willa Cather, and I was like, "Who is this woman? I've never heard of her. I thought I knew about most classics. Apparently not." Yeah, and I heard from also from Margaret as well that her writing is similar to Louisa May Alcott, which at the time was like, oh well, I think the Little Women was like easier to follow than some of their classics, so hopefully that'll be the same with Little Cather. And I picked this one because it seems like this is the first in a series, or uh, there are three books that are not officially a series but are connected, or are unofficially a series. So yeah, I don't know, but that should be interesting. The next book that I added to my TBR is "And the Shofar Blue" by Francine Rivers. This will be my third book by this author, and possibly my last, because I don't really know what other books by Francine Rivers I want to read. I was interested in Bridge to Haven, but I'd heard that that apparently has Fade to Black scenes, which that's a no for me. I know for some no spice readers that's fine, but not for me. I don't like Fade to Black scenes. So there's that. And I know people rave about the Mark of the Lion series, but I'm not really interested in that series as well. And honestly, I think all the hype that it gets makes me even less interested. But anyways, enough about the Francine Rivers books I don't want to read. So this one, "And the Shofar Blue," I thought this one sounded interesting, so hopefully it should be good. Next up, the next book that I added to my 2026 TBR was originally on my 2027 TBR, but I moved it to this TBR because I guess I was just really itching to read it, and that is If I'm Being Honest by Emily Wibberley. So yeah, I'd heard about this book when it came up as being similar to In Some Other Life by Jessica Brody, so that already was interested. But then I heard this, read the synopsis, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And I remember looking at reviews, like to determine if it was clean. And I remember I remember reading, or at least clean in terms of sexual content, because I'm pretty sure there is language, because I mean, there's language in the synopsis. Yeah, so I remember when doing research to find out if it was clean in terms of sexual content. I remember the review where someone was like, "It's clean, y'all." So I was like, "Yes." So I mean, it's contemporary YA. What can I say? Hopefully that means I'll enjoy it. So yeah. The last two books that I added to my 2026 TBR I'll talk about together. So they're both Christmas books, and that is, and those books are Let It Glow by Marissa Meyer and Joanne Levy, and Christmas Child, or The Christmas Child, I'm not exactly sure how it's supposed to be, but The Christmas Child by Linda Goodnight. So yeah, these are Christmas books, because like I was a little disappointed that like last year I didn't allow myself to read Christmas books around this time. So I want to change that for this year, although with how my TBR is, the latest I will read these is probably November. So not quite Christmas season, but close enough. So yeah, and I picked these books because they're both available on Libby, and I just like the idea of Christmas books on Libby, but the thing is they don't always have the Christmas books that I want to read. Like, for example, Melody Carlson, of course, she's known for all her YA books, but she's also written quite a lot of Christmas books, but there's only one of them available on Libby for Melody Carlson, and that was The Christmas Joyride, which I read 2 years ago. So yeah, but she doesn't have any other Christmas books on Libby, so yeah, but these two are available. I've heard these good things about Let It Glow, and The Christmas Child I don't know much about, but I think I did research to confirm that it is clean. So yeah, hopefully that'll be good. So now let's move on to talking about the quick list. So why I came up with this title, The Quick List, well, it was partially inspired by a clean rom-com book that I haven't read, but I've heard of it before, so it's kind of somewhat in my mind. And that book is called The Quit List. So again, I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. And of course, I said quick because this is like, if I read quick, then I can read these. So yeah, that is basically the idea of the title. And although although I would like to read all these books this year, I want to hold this list with the idea that I might not read these this year, or at least read all of them this year, but they are ones that I am really wanting to read. There are some I'm itching to read more than others, although it seems like the ones I'm itching to read changes depending on the week. So yeah, but let's get started into the quick list. First up on the quick list is A Golden Hope by Chelsea Noel. So this is a fairy tale retelling, and I don't know why I've been super itching to read this one. Maybe because of the cover, but I most likely won't even have a physical copy. So yeah, there's that. So this is, from what I've heard, a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, as I'm sure you could have gathered by the title, A Golden Hope. So yeah, I don't know. It's be interesting to see what form this story would take, but yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that one. Next up on the quick list is a book where this will be the second book I have read by this author. I read one book and I didn't really care for it, but I had read it during my I need to be drawn in to really like it phase, so I want to give this author another chance. And it's interesting that this will be the second book that I've read by this author, because when I first heard about it, I thought it had not necessarily content problems, but content that's pushing my comfort levels a bit. But then I found out that it's apparently fine for content. So then I was really wanting to read it after that. And without further ado, it is the book Saint Anything by Sarah Dessen. Now, as I was really itching to read this one for a while, although now that reading it might be around the corner, will say I've been getting a little bit nervous to read it, just with it having Saint in the title. I'm kind of wondering, will there be stuff about Christianity or stuff of that nature? But I haven't heard anything like that, so hopefully there won't be stuff like that in there, but still a little nervous, but I guess we shall see. So the first review that I read from this book was didn't this person didn't care for it that much because I think I remember they said that it felt like this book was just an exercise in creating good characters. Like it seems like what I got from that was that the characters were really strong, but the plot was lacking. Which, like, and I know I've said on many occasions that I don't think I'm a character driven reader, so you might think, oh, why are you still interested in that after that? But the one aspect of the other Sarah Dessen book I've read, which was The Truth About Forever, the one aspect that I did think was interesting, that I wished I could have enjoyed it more, that I wish I didn't need to be drawn in to like it, was the characters. So I thought the characters were the standout from the other book, so hopefully that means I'll like this one as well. The next book on my quick list is Searching for Normal by C.J. Darlington. So this is the second book in the Riverbend Friends series. The first book was Real Not Perfect by Stephanie Coleman, which you've been around at all this year. You know I love that book. I have warned you, I will not shut up about that book at all this year. But that is, of course, in the first in a 7 or 8 book series. Like some lists don't include an 8th book. So yeah, so of course, after really loving Real Not Perfect, I've been wanting to read more from this series, but since I planned my TBR way in advance, I would kind of think, well, I guess I probably won't get to the second book and with the rest of the books in a long time. Yeah, and of course I wanted to kind of save it because there was a certain type of vlog I wanted to do with the 4th book, but I don't know if I will eventually do that vlog. I might have to do it a bit differently or with different books. So, but anyways, so yeah, of course this is just the second book. It's just this book on the quick list from this series, but hopefully this will tide me over until I get to read the 3rd and 4th book and hopefully the rest of the series. So yeah, I will say I have been a little bit nervous for this series because this is a multi-authored series, but they're following the same characters. And I've heard I haven't read a multi-authored series where they're following the same characters, but from what I have heard, it can I think when they're following the same characters because there's different people running it, there's more chance for people to act out of character. So I'm a little nervous for that, but I think from what I can tell, they seem to do it a little bit better. So it seems like how they do it is that each author writes a different girl's book. So, for example, Stephanie Coleman writes Tessa's books. It seems like C.J. Darlington writes Shay's books, and so on with the other girls. So hopefully that means it'll turn out better. So yeah, I'm a little nervous, but hopefully it won't be as bad. So this book is a with C.J. Darlington. This is Shay's story, which, as I've said before, I did not like Shay as much as I liked Izzy and Amelia, but hopefully hoping that from like hoping that why can't I speak? Uh, from what I've read from the back of this book about Shay's story, I'm interested. So, yes, and yeah, honestly, this is, of course, the book on this quick list that I am most itching to read. Although, I probably, I kind of want to wait until at least September to read this book because it seems like this does take place during the school year, but we'll see how patient I can be. The next book on the quick list is After the Water Brooks by Erica Dancero. So this is second book. I don't know. There's not an official order for the series, but it seems like the first book was Come Forth as Gold, and it seems like this is at the very least a sequel to that book because we are still following Claude and Kitty. Yeah, we're following them, although it seems also from the synopsis that this is a dual timeline story. So it seems like we're following Claude and Kitty in the 1980s, and then we're also following this other woman in the 1930s. So, and I've heard like mixed things about dual timeline books, or at least I've heard I've heard of some people who like dual timeline books, and then I've also heard some like downsides to dual timeline books. I don't think I've read a dual timeline book. I think the closest I've read was The Bride Unknown, where most of the book took place in the 19. We're following this character in the 1940s, but there are a few chapters where we followed this same character in the 1990s. So I don't think that really counts. So yeah, and what I've heard about dual timeline books is that it can be you get more invested in one timeline than the other, and I fear that may happen here because I am definitely more interested in reading Claude and Kitty's story in the 1980s than this other woman in the 1930s. Because so I feel like with historical fiction, like there's many different times covered, but I feel like the most recent, typically in historical fiction, is like the 1950s. But I've been more curious. I think especially after reading a few chapters in the 1990s in The Bright Unknown, I'm like, well, I want more historical fiction from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So hopefully this will satisfy that because it seems like we're definitely going to get more from a 1980s timeline than in The Bright Unknown with the 90s. So, yeah, looking forward to that. So, next up on the quick list is Faith Under Pressure by Courtney M. Whitaker. This is a very obscure Christian contemporary YA. I'm pretty sure it has like less than 30 ratings on Goodreads or something. It's like, although I'm starting to question that because I remember reading a good amount of reviews, but whatever. I think it's definitely more obscure than even Real Not Perfect. So, well, speaking of Real Not Perfect, how I first heard about this book was when I was reading reviews of Real Not Perfect. Someone mentioned that this book was similar to that one. So of course I'm like, say no more. I want to read this book as well. So yeah, looking forward to this one and looking forward to reading another obscure book. The next book on the quick list is Crack the Stone by Emily Golis. So this is in the same multi-authored series as Unearth the Tides by Alyssa J. Zavalianos. The series is called A Classic Retold, and it's basically fantasy retellings of classic books, classic stories, kinds of things. So, and I don't think the books are connecting in any ways, but you know, they might. Of course, the authors might connect it to some of their own books. But anyways, but I don't think you have to read them in any particular order. So, yeah. So this book is a retelling of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which I have not read that book, but I did watch the movie adaptation of the musical. I think did that come out in 2012? The one with Hugh Jackman. So, yeah. I don't know. People have some kind of feelings about that one. So, but hopefully that means that I've at least got the main points of the story. Like I know with Unearth the Tides, I was not familiar at all with the book that it was a retelling of. So hopefully with this one, which didn't, of course, didn't hinder my experience with Unearth the Tides, but hopefully with this one, I'll be able to see more how it is as a retelling. Yeah, that should be interesting. And this also, it says in the synopsis that this book has West African elements, or like it has like a West African empire, which of course it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. Although the thing with me is that when I hear like a book has like influences from other cultures, or like, oh, this has Irish and Scottish lore. Oh, this is inspired by Chinese mythology, and I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. But then I'm thinking like, okay, but when I actually read that book, am I actually gonna catch what's inspired by their cultures or mythology? Probably not, but it'll still Still sounds interesting. And then last but not least on the quick list is Glass Girl by Laura Anderson Kirk. So I have in my notes that, because when I first put these notes together, I thought this would be the one that if I were to read most of these books but not one, this would be the one that I likely wouldn't read. But and more recently, I've been more itching to read this one. So how I first heard of this book was, I think the author, Laura Anderson Kirk, I think she either wrote an endorsement in the book or like wrote a review, but she in some way endorsed, I think, one of the status updates books by Laura L. Smith. So I kind of thought, oh, maybe I should check out one of her books, and this was one I could find. So so yeah, I think this is also Christian contemporary YA, but I don't know what this is about, but hopefully it should be interesting. So that is all for this video. This will be probably the closest thing you'll get to a TBR video from me, at least at this point in my life. So yeah, that is all. Hope you enjoyed this video. That is all. Goodbye!